I definitely want to thank everybody for coming here and being so punctual on a Saturday. That's pretty awesome. There's so many of you that I haven't met and so many of you that I have. My name is April. I'm a new board member on the Cherokee community of the Puget Sound. I've had a really warm welcome. I've enjoyed the work so far. And I definitely want to take a little bit of time, since we do have Principal Chief Hoskin here, to say thank you to you and to the Cherokee Nation Council for the grant. We were able to not only keep most of our membership and continue to allow them a little bit of relief of not having to pay their dues this year, but we've actually increased our membership, and we have 4 new board members. So myself, Mary, who's with us here. We have Ellis here today, right? Yeah, there you are, Ellis. And David, which okay. So that's just, we're going strong. And as you all know, we have over 6,000 Cherokee citizens here in Washington State, bigger than some of the tribes that are here. And although we're not at home, these outreach sessions that you've been doing, Kim Teehee, have just really inspired so many of us to think of, like, how can we flex our muscle to strengthen Indian country all the way over here in Washington State. And so not only do we want to build our own community and support each other through crisis and difficult times, and of course celebrate and congregate whenever we can safely, but in the meantime, you know, with just a little bit of advocacy, how can we certainly get you seated and do all of the other things? Because I know that when we do that, we're not only strengthening the Cherokee Nation, but we're strengthening Indian country all the way out here in Washington State with all the tribes. So with that, I just wanted to thank both of you for coming, the rest of you for taking your precious time out of your day to share with us. And I also wanted to just take a moment for us all to acknowledge all of our ancestors who had the forethought and the courage and did the sacrifice to preserve Cherokee culture and to extend the lineage to allow so many of us to have that connection and have all those privileges that come with being a Cherokee citizen. And I also want to just thank the Lummi and Nooksack people and all the Coast Salish people that have been caring for the land that I'm here on in Bellingham, Washington today since time immemorial, and that continue to advocate for Mother Earth and a healthy environment that we have here. So with that, I wanted to make sure if you all have any questions today. We are talking about how to advocate for the Cherokee Nation. We're going to have Principal Chief Hoskin is going to talk a little bit, probably give us a little update, and we'll introduce our future delegate to Congress, Kim Teehee, which I'm a little bit of I'm a fan, so I'm just so glad that you're here. I feel very privileged to have you in on this Zoom session. And then we're going to continue. They might have to leave us, and we're going to continue. And I'm going to walk you through easy ways. This really only takes a few moments out of your day and really out of your year. And I'll walk you through where you can find that information, how you can do it, how you can personalize your letter, why that's so important. And as a past elected official here in Bellingham, Washington, I'm just going to share with you how to personalize that and why it is so important to keep those connections, because it does matter. You really can make an impact with just a letter. And then, yeah, we'll have some time to talk and build community, and then we'll send you all off. So welcome, everybody. And with that, I'll introduce Principal Chief Chuck Hoskins Jr. Hoskin Jr. I always add an S. I'm so sorry. I'm working on it.
That's okay. Everybody adds that S. I've thought about just adding it myself, making it easier. I am really glad to be back with you all. April, that introduction really made my day when you mentioned the growth of the organization and the additional board members. You know, one of the things that I wanted to support as chief is organizing in communities, particularly at-large communities, which have been at it a long time in terms of organizing, but, you know, I thought could use some additional resources. And never in anyone's mind did we think we would be doing that in the midst of a pandemic, you know, the worst public health crisis in living memory. And yet you all have found a way, you know, with a little help from the Cherokee Nation, but that help doesn't cause you to get up on Saturday and come to these meetings. It doesn't compel you to get together and share stories and ideas. That comes from you. And if we can get behind it, we want to do it. We need more of this across the country, frankly. But insofar as Cherokee Nation is concerned, we need more of it in the at-large communities, and we really need more of it in communities across the reservation. But we are committed to keep supporting what you're doing and what people are doing here at home, and I think it makes a difference. I think we can do a good deal of we can be a good deal of assistance to each other by organizing in our communities. Today's topic is, I promise you, going to be a real treat for you all. Even if you've heard Kim Teehee before, if you haven't, it's going to be, I think, enlightening, because it is for me every time Kim and I get together and chat. You'll find out, if you don't already know, why she was unanimously confirmed by the council on my appointment to be the delegate to the United States House of Representatives, because I don't know what our ancestors exactly had in mind when they were crafting this treaty provision and kept it in place through even our last treaty, the Treaty of 1866. But I'd like to think they had Kim Teehee in mind. I'd like to think they had a full-blood, brilliant Cherokee woman in mind. Whether or not they had those specifics in mind, we have the good fortune of having her in this position, and we're going to get this done. This wasn't something we decided to invoke in terms of a treaty provision because we thought it was be easy, be a cakewalk, and we could just walk right in and she could take her seat. We knew it'd be a challenge. It's been a bit of a challenge, but we're really optimistic about what we can do, and we really will get there. And I think we'll rise and fall in part based on the support we have from the Cherokee people and what they do to speak out and support. And I think part of what, April, you're talking about, and maybe you'll be touching on later in the program, is how you can speak out on those issues, on the delegate issue and others. But insofar as government relations concerned, I can't overstate the importance of it. And it's been true throughout our history. When you think about it, I mean, you could go back before contact and talk about the fact that we had to, engage in relations with our neighbors and care about who was living around us. But even just looking at European contact forward, it's been so critical that we stand our ground where we can, that we negotiate. I was visiting with my daughter the other day. She had visited the Cherokee Nation History Museum, the old Capitol building here in Tahlequah, which, if you haven't seen it one day, I hope all of you can see it. We're talking about the syllabary, the importance of the syllabary in Cherokees being able to communicate internally in Cherokee, and then communicating externally in English during a time in the 19th century when there's so much pressure, really so many threats to our existence. In fact, the fact that we're even here really is against very steep odds. But I think the way that we persevered is that, and I was talking to my daughter about the fact that we didn't take up arms necessarily against the United States during that time period. And had we done so, who knows what the consequences would be. But we took up the pen. We used our intellect. We used our diplomatic skills, and we did our best to stand our ground. Of course, we know we're removed, but I think that entire chapter in history built something in our national character, and a lot of it has to do with how we relate to the governments around us, and that is still true today. It's more true today, I think, and more important today maybe than it's ever been. Just think about this past year, or really year and a half. We've had one of the most difficult, but we were successful in it, fights with the governor of the state of Oklahoma in the history of the state of Oklahoma over a gaming compact, one of the most senseless disputes ever, but it was still a dispute we had to stand our ground on, and we came out on top of that dispute. That seems like a lifetime ago, though, given what's happened since then. COVID, I mentioned the worst pandemic in living memory. It's gripped the entire world. Every government, every institution, every organization has had to do something to face it. part of the way we've done it from the beginning, in addition to protecting people at home, is to make sure that our interests were protected in Washington, D.C. And that's where Kim Teehee and her really talented team of men and women who dedicate their lives to this, to dedicate their careers to this, come into play. That's why we were able to harness resources back home and share a good deal of them with citizens at large and organizations. And along the way, there were difficulties, but I always felt very confident in our ability to, again, protect our interest here and protect our interest in Washington, D.C. or Oklahoma City, wherever they may be, because of the work of our government relations department. And here we are during a period of transition with the government of the United States, and irrespective of who wins elections and which party is in control, anytime there is that change or that renewal or that transition, it is critically important that tribes have a seat at the table. And to have a seat at the table, you need people who know what they're doing. And that's another reason I'm glad we have this wonderful government relations team, because it's very fast moving in Washington, D.C., particularly during this time of transition. So I feel like we're still protecting our interest, even in the midst of what is a very difficult time. We just had a major piece of legislation pass the Congress that is the American Rescue Plan, and part of that, a good part of that, impacts Indian country. And rest assured, not only did we advocate for those provisions, really for all of Indian country, we were going to keep advocating to make sure those resources get out of Washington, D.C. and get out into tribal lands, including the Cherokee Nation. Now, that is a full-time job. That is a job that requires a keen intellect. It requires a great work ethic. It requires a person who can build a team and inspire that team to do great things. And that's Kim Teehee, and she's going to share some thoughts with you today. But I'm glad to be here. I'm so proud of what you're doing, and I hope we see more of this across our Cherokee community. So thank you all very much. I'm going to stick around for a little bit and listen. And then I've got another matter to tend to, but thank you all very much. Waddell.
All right. Thank you, Chief Hoskin. Well, OCO, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I'm so honored to be asked to do this. I typically just do the at-large monthly meetings, which I love, and this has got me thinking about maybe doing these one-off discussions with the various at-large communities, because part of what we're discussing today, civic engagement, at least from my point of view, my perspective, since I deal with the federal portfolio, is your ability to engage your congressional delegation, right? You guys, the Washington State delegation is pretty awesome, right? And you guys have tribes that are politically empowered and culturally very much attuned to their history and their culture and their ways of life. You have a governor that's pro-sovereignty. I was a Hill staffer when then Congressman Jay Inslee was on the Hill, and he was a remarkable member of Congress and who completely understood the issues that impact Indian country, and he's taken that understanding in his leadership statewide. And so I'm obviously very impressed, but I'm also impressed by our Cherokee citizens in the state who want to stay so engaged in what we do. And this has me thinking first off about what I want to say about civic engagement. Oftentimes, because our constituency is so small, I feel like we have to yell the loudest to be heard, right? And oftentimes in most school systems, we don't learn about ourselves in curriculum. And so there's an invisibility issue that arises. And fast forward to what that means if you're a decision maker that impacts our communities, someone who most likely is not going to be like a Jay Inslee, who won't have that background because he wasn't raised in an environment that taught him about the history of Native Americans, the tribal nations, their unique languages and cultures, their government, and federal policy. We don't really learn those details. And so, the career that I've forged for myself as a Hill staffer first, and then as a White House staffer, always began with Indians 101. Every legislative session, why does Congress even have a role in Indian affairs? Because time and time again, you get a new member of Congress, you get new Hill staff who know nothing about Indian issues, who are being asked to make decisions about our people. And so it behooves us to take time to educate people. And oftentimes I have to ask for forgiveness before I begin a discussion about what I've come to meet on. The delegate issue is a perfect example of that, because we can't assume people know our history, our legal history, and why treaties matter today, and why Congress should uphold treaty rights, and why the United States should uphold treaty rights, and why these treaties are still the law today, why they're still binding on the parties that entered into those treaties. And so, part of that discussion is, you have to go back to 18th century, 19th century, to the current day history in order to capture the circumstances, of why we're asserting a 185-year-old treaty right today, right? And so education matters. And so that's why I get excited about this kind of forum, because information is critical, it's key, it's empowering as well. It sets the context for the thing that you're asking for. It provides important background for people who want to know why you're making a request that you're making. Why do you do that? Well, I say because it allows you an opportunity to potentially change minds, to change what people are presently thinking just because they didn't know better. I've seen this play out time and time again. There's an issue that's ongoing. It's still ongoing. It's been reported greatly regarding the San Carlos Apache tribe of Arizona. They have a ceremonial area called Oak Flat, where they believe their deity came from. And their ceremonies are performed there. And they are fighting a mining company from engaging in block cave mining that could destroy this area. And so I recall having to change mind when I served as a lobbyist many years ago and represented them with my colleagues. And I recall moments, aha moments, in members of Congress when we brought a young woman, for example, in her coming of age regalia, and explaining the ceremony that can only occur in this location, and what it means for her if that were to go away, and what it would mean for Christians who, saw something that's so valuable to their religion destroyed. How do you tell future generations about your beliefs if the thing that symbolizes it is gone? And so, but I recall seeing just members just change. When you humanize a story, you make the history and the religion and whatever those factors are that are important to that issue matter, you educate. You don't change everyone's minds, but you at least know that they appreciate whatever the story is you're trying to tell, and that they're making an informed decision. And so I think it's critical. I mean, I've seen it be effective. I've seen it not be effective. And I have walked away scratching my head, what else could I have said? What else could I have done? And then I realized sometimes my goal is not to get to 100%. It's to get to 51, the majority of the people whose minds I need to change. And which leads me to the other piece is knowing your policies that you're advancing, knowing the law, what the law is. You don't have to be a lawyer. But the law so impacts what we do as Native people, because so much of what has happened to our people, the good things and the bad things, are direct results of policy and laws that oftentimes have created great hardships. We are descended from people who survived the forced removal of the Trail of Tears, and so all those matter. We also know voting matters, right? That's just one way that we voice our positions, is by voting. But these kinds of forums matter too. Building a community of people who are like-minded. We don't have all the answers. I wouldn't purport to have all the answers. It matters to me. It matters to Chief Hoskin what our communities think, you know, and it matters that we have this engagement, because you guys have a different perspective than I might have, just because you live in the Northwest. And so, but building that sense of community, being thoughtful in this kind of environment, having dialogue, sharing your beliefs and your ideas where you feel free to do so. It creates a network, which is key here, because the greater the network, then the greater opportunity you have to help influence minds, either on the local level, state level, federal level, tribal level. And so I do think that's important. I also think it's key too, because you are influencing future generations, you know, bringing youth into this, you know, by example, you're showing the youth in your lives that being Cherokee matters to you all the way in the Northwest, and that you are trying to stay connected the best way you know how, by, you know, by using your Saturday mornings when you don't have to be engaged with your tribal nation, and your tribal nation is embracing you and wanting to see you do this kind of things, you know. But it's not always going to be easy. You know, there are great impediments. We've seen, you know, with a presidential election, we've seen, you know, how the civil discourse has devolved, right? And it turns people off. People, you know, think of politics as something that just nobody, they don't want to deal with. So they just turn a blind eye. You know, I've been a huge advocate and have mentors who have taught me about the importance of civil engagement, that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to be of different parties, because at some point you've got to find some commonality that will help influence someone someday. You know, I was fortunate that I had a mentor and former Principal Chief, the late Wilma Mankiller. She taught me this lesson first and foremost. She became deputy chief, and she was a yellow dog Democrat. You know, when Ross Swimmer, who was conservative Republican, asked her to be his deputy chief, they could not be any more different politically, but they got along fabulously. And in an environment, at a time when, you know, women just weren't as active as she was in tribal politics, not the way she grew up. She was in California during the civil rights era, you know, marching with other natives and occupying Alcatraz. I mean, and upholding treaty rights. Puget Sound is an area where she laid some groundwork too. And so my point there is she did this in a way that she made allies, not enemies. And, you know, she probably made enemies too, political enemies too, but she worked with Republican and Democrats because she understood that it took both sides to really advance our issues. So we've seen, you know, impediments to change and positive change be whenever we get thrown into a lack of civil discourse and lack of awareness. I hit on this earlier, which is, you know, people are not inclined to move the needle when it comes to our issues if they're not aware. So lack of awareness can be an impediment. It's always easier to say no than it is to say yes, because yes has consequences and it leads to other things. And sometimes people just say no because they don't know, they're not aware. You know, using this kind of form, you know, especially in the era of COVID, you know, Zoom calls, this kind of face-to-face interaction, internet, video conferencing. Once again, you know, I look forward to the day when we will be in person, face-to-face, but all these things matter. These things that bring us together as citizenry of the Cherokee Nation, I think matters. Now, what all can we do with this? Well, we have seen, Chief Hoskin mentioned it earlier, how this could become an effective tool. An effective tool is, you know, the American Rescue Plan. In order to talk about the American Rescue Plan, I have to back up and talk about the CARES Act, because the CARES Act is where tribes received $8 billion in direct funding for tribal nations. The House had voted on, at the time, this is all pre-presidential election, the House had voted on previously $20 billion for Indian tribes. And that's what tribes collectively had worked on together. I'm talking about tribes in the state that you reside, all across the country, through the representatives, all gathered. And I was fortunate to be a part of those discussions because of the positions I'd once held, that I was invited to be at the table with these people and building strategies and talking about what our needs were. And, and we almost didn't get 8 billion. This was one of the final things that was being discussed in the early hours. And I recall texting Deb Haaland because she was the champion for Indians on the Democratic side of things in the House side, when I heard that the White House was not wanting any dollars to go to tribes. And we knew she had a direct line to Speaker Pelosi. We knew Pelosi needed to get Senator Schumer, the then minority leader of the Senate, and insist that tribes, get some funding. That's how $8 billion came to be, but it was almost not the case. And I did not have a second thought about texting Deb and our chief of staff at the time, 11 o'clock, midnight, my time, which would have been 1 o'clock in the morning, her time, and getting responses back because we were all staying up late at night trying to figure that out. This is what I mean about the fact that we often have to yell the loudest. And oftentimes, when the hard decisions get made about the country and how the CARES Act is going to deal with them, then we're sort of an afterthought. What are we going to do about the Indians? But those moments come. And I always say, when those moments come, be prepared. Be prepared. When you get invited to the table, we often yell and scream the loudest and wanting so badly to be at the table when decisions are being made. A part of that is knowing what to say once you're at the table, knowing what you're advocating for once you're at the table, and having that proposal ready once you're at the table. We thought we would get 20 billion then. We got 8 billion. That was still a big chunk of change for tribes. There was still problems with it because when finally that became law, funding was being distributed, litigation ensued, and consultations took place. We're still in litigation over Alaska Native Corporation eligibility for those CARES Act dollars. So there's $500 million sitting out that's not been distributed. Tribes are facing a spin down deadline of December 31st of last year. There were great hurdles to overcome. The funding was the Treasury Department put so many restrictions on the use of fund, it became very hard for our finance people to figure out how to spend down those dollars. Plus, Congress was not yet appropriating on regular order appropriations. We were living off of continuing resolutions. So we were facing time and time again potential for government shutdowns. Why that matters to us, to all tribes throughout the Indian country, is that at least 90 to 95% of all federal dollars that flow to Indian tribes are considered discretionary dollars. When government shuts down, that funding stops. And if those tribes do not have anything in reserve or any ability to redeploy their dollars, then they are going to hurt. And the poorest of the poor tend to suffer. Healthcare tends to suffer, and so it's a great disruption to the community. So that's kind of what the environment we were facing as we were coming into the next year. And then obviously we had a new Congress, a new president. Congress did pass the regular appropriations bill. They did extend the spend down date of the CARES Act funding, but now we have the American Rescue Plan. But we also have a congressional landscape that's changed. This is the other part of educating, not only others about our issues, but also educating ourselves, because part of making change, at least federal change, policy and law, requires us to know what the congressional landscape is, right? What your state landscape is, because you're of most help to us in the state that you are, because you have great champions for Indian country who are members of the congressional delegation. And so, but what is the landscape? We know that the Democrats control the House and the Senate. We know by very slim margins. The Senate is a 50-50 split. They actually have a power sharing agreement so that they have equal staff, they have equal committee slots, they have equal budgets. And so, and then the tie break, the number 51, if there is such a need for that, is the Vice President, Kamala Harris. We also know we have probably the most racially diverse Congress ever in the history of this country. We have about a quarter of members of Congress who identify as racial or ethnic minorities. And we have 5 members of Congress who are Native American. We used to have 6, but you know what happened to the 6th one, right? She is now the Department of Interior Secretary. And exactly. And so I think as the Northwest Indians, they do this, right? And but yeah, so there will be a special election in her seat, and there is actually the front runner is Acoma Pueblo. So it could be another woman, and Chief Hoskin and I have already had the pleasure of talking to her. There's also a record 140 women who are in Congress. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because we always strive as Native people to not only do we make up the fabric of the United States and the great diversity that it has, but it never in the history of the United States have been so represented on the different levels of government. We have a record number of Native Americans in the legislature, in the Congress. We now have, for the first time, a cabinet secretary. When I served in the Obama administration, we thought the glass shattered because of his greatness, and he's definitely set the foundation for this president to move forward on. But I was a first ever senior policy advisor for a sitting president. We had the first Native woman who's a federal judge. She's still a judge, and she's a Republican. So we had an Obama administration that, who also appointed a Republican to be his Department of Transportation secretary at the time. So he believed greatly in civil discourse. We had the very first Native American U.S. ambassador, Keith Harper, who's also a Cherokee Nation citizen, who, by the way, was just in Tahlequah yesterday and received his Johnson & Johnson vaccination because he couldn't get it in D.C., right? So he flew in, and Cherokee Nation opened up our vaccination. And we understand that not everybody can afford to travel, but for those that do, we welcome you, because we want to make sure we know that it's a challenge in other places of the country to get your vaccinations. And so, we've opened up our system to those who want to get a vaccination and can't get it elsewhere. And so anyway, so there were all these first, and then what does Biden do? What was left for him to do? Well, let's create a cabinet position. It didn't happen that easily. It did not happen that easily. I'd love to say this was the plan all along, but what did happen? We saw that voting matters, and that Indian country has great influence in how the outcomes matter in elections. Arizona was pivotal in President Biden's election, and the Native Americans are what brought the outcome of that race home in that state. Similarly, high Native population matters in voting outcomes in other states, such as New Mexico and Montana, Oklahoma as well. And, we have champions on both sides of the aisle, right? So it matters in the Republican and Democratic races. And so it matters. It matters because Indian country has, over the years, been evolving into using leveraging their political influence in a way that has never been seen before. Political influence in some respects also has contributed to their ability to engage in the political process through political giving, being more savvy about relationships with state, local, federal officials, participating like we do. Chief Hoskin makes it a mission of ours to engage at every level of government. I belong to 2 Tulsa, City of Tulsa commissions now, and not because it has a direct impact on Cherokee Nation's day-to-day life, but because Tulsa is the most major city in northeastern Oklahoma, and we want to partner. We are good partners, and so we want to make sure that we're influencing what comes out of the city, and that we're staying informed, and that we are ever present in the city's decision making as well. And so that's, these are just some examples of how it matters. And so ultimately in the rescue plan, Indian country got $31.2 billion. That is huge, and that is historic investment. $20 billion will be direct funding to tribes. Treasury is starting to engage in consultation. This president has already made consultation a top priority for his administration by issuing a presidential memorandum on consultation. In the memorandum that I wrote in 2009 helped influence the framework for this presidential memorandum. They customize it, and that's okay because there's a lot of good framework there. But that framework requires the agencies to submit to the White House and to the Office of Management and Budget agency plans on how they plan to consult. And it further requires them to consult with Indian country on consultation. You know, concurrent with this level of consultation is rescue plan consultation going on right now. Tribes are kind of getting fatigued by all the consultation. Travis Nolan, who I should have introduced earlier, is on this call, and he's a Cherokee Nation manager of government relations, and he's been helping to keep our calendar on consultation, because when it comes to rescue plan, where distribution and interpretation and guidance is going to be issued, you know, we must stay engaged, because it's going to matter to us ultimately what those agencies say about how to spend those dollars, about how to use those dollars, and about when the money should be spent down, which, by the way, in this law is December 30th, 2024. So we've got a little bit of breathing room as well. But these provisions don't just happen. They happen because people helped lay the foundation of education. It happened because we knew when the House of Representatives last year passed a bill called the HEBLS Act that we had to be included in some congressional package that passed, because we knew that would probably serve as a template for some future rescue plan. So we tried to get 20 billion. I actually didn't think we would get 20 billion out of the House bill, but we did. But ultimately, CARES Act said 8 billion. So, but that 20 billion was still there. And when President Biden released his rescue plan and it said 20 billion for Indian country, the Native American Affairs White House staff had not yet been installed. And so I remember having a lengthy phone call with the person who has my old position. Her name, by the way, is Libby Rodkey Washburn. She is a Chickasaw citizen from Oklahoma. She's from Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. She's a lawyer. We worked on the Hill many years ago together when she worked for Senator Bingaman, a former member of Congress from New Mexico. And she was also in the Obama administration. And she is the wife of Kevin Washburn, who's the former Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. And so both good friends of mine, but we were talking, and she had asked, you know, where did this 20 billion come from? You know, I'm asking people, and I said, here's where it came from. It came from the HEROES Act. You know, here's what the White House does in this instance. You know, kind of explaining, at least in my day, what the internal process was in the Obama era. You know, could be similar because the person over legislative affairs in the White House, Louisa Terrell, is a former colleague. She worked in the Obama administration with me. She helped me on the VAWA, Violence Against Women Act reauthorization back then. And so I'm like, you know, coordinate with her so that when the White House is messaging with the congressional members, that they are including Indian country because it's in the president's framework. And so concurrently with the conversations we're having with the White House, we're also having conversations with committee staff on the Senate and the House side of things. You know, why do we do that? Well, I find allies in people who represent other tribes where we're like-minded, because not every tribe is going to think alike, especially large tribes versus small tribes. And so, and then we make sure that we coordinate on our positions, and then we engage with the staff. These things matter because it's a constant lesson of knowing process, knowing who the decision makers are, and making sure you're touching on, if you know them, and then people in the administration as well as on the Hill, and that you're making your best case. How do we make that best case? Well, we talk about Cherokee Nation in my instance. They wanted to know, how have you been restricted on using your funds? How has, the spin down deadline of December 30th, how has it harmed you? And those kinds of things. So it's important to stay informed. And so my job is to work with Congress to get the resources we need, and then others make the decisions on how we spend down the funding. But I always stay informed on what we're doing, because I got to take those examples back to, and when we do things that are innovative, and you guys have seen all the national press that Chief Hoskin and Cherokee Nation has rightfully received for its innovative way in which we responded to COVID, that matters. Because that matters concurrently, because members of Congress especially want to know that we're using our funds in the best way possible, and that we're being great stewards of those use of funds. So that matters as well. And so where we are now with all of this is, one is you guys probably are some of you probably already started getting your individual payments in the mail, you know, but there's so much there for us. But the money for the tribes haven't started coming out yet because there's some timelines. So there's like some 60, 90-day timelines for distribution, and there's tribal consultations taking place. So we're working on those things right now. But but it doesn't stop there. There's still a full appropriations process. The rescue plan was just a stimulus package, right? It's part of the president's recovery plan, but he still has a budget he has to get through Congress, and normally those get submitted to Congress in February. So the president's not expected to submit a full budget probably until May. He'll probably submit some skinny version of a budget in April, but a more comprehensive one in May, and that'll reflect his views for fiscal year 2022. In that, what we're fighting for is for his support for mandatory funding for the Indian Health Service. Because of all the reasons that I told you earlier about discretionary dollars and about facing shutdown, what we're hoping will happen is that we will get the president to support mandatory funding for, at the very minimum, Indian Health Service. It's something he supports. He put it in his Tribal Nations plan. It has bipartisan support in the Congress. Congressman Cole supported it. He and Betty McCollum from Minnesota, as well as I think Mr. Kilmer and others were on record as supporting this early on. So my hope is that we get to that place where we start identifying those, particularly those programs that relate to public safety and healthcare, food security, that those things eventually all become mandatorily funded. But we'll start with Indian Health Service. So our hope is that that happens. And as Chief Hoskins said, we're still working on delegate to Congress. We've had just yesterday a wonderful meeting because we're working with leadership and with members of Congress and staff on revisiting the conversations we've had previously, and then trying to develop a strategy behind what the speaker needs to do. Importantly, we had the support of Congresswoman Deb Haaland while she served in Congress, and she plans to maintain that support in the administration. So we're hoping she will lead the voice of the administration on this. Does it require the White House? No. It doesn't, because the treaty right is already the supreme law of the land. It was already in 1835 ratified by the Senate and signed by the president, and it has never been invalidated law. It is still the law today. So, but what it does mean is that, we are aware that, in the circumstance where Democrats control the Congress and the White House, there's a lot of coordination there. So you better believe something as historic as honoring a treaty right is going to require a nod from the White House. And I can't imagine a better person to lead that charge in the White House and in the administration than the Secretary of Interior, who was also a Native American woman. And so it's an historic time indeed. And so, and I know you guys are going to see my video later, so I won't go too deep into the weeds here, but I will say this. The Violence Against Women Act is a priority of Cherokee Nation. It's a priority of the First Lady of the Cherokee Nation, January Hoskins. She has made it part of her platform, Women and Children and Healthy Families. And so we have on the state side been advocating for legislation, which is moving, and we hope to get it signed into law that would, within the state, create an office to deal with and to be a coordinating role for murdered and missing Indigenous peoples. Importantly, in the House just this week, it passed the Violence Against Women Act authorization. And it's important to look at these bills because VAWA 21 builds upon VAWA 2013, which is the one that I worked on, which gave special jurisdiction over for tribes to have special jurisdiction over certain non-Indian defendants who commit domestic violence on tribal reservations. And so so VAWA 21 would expand that special jurisdiction on other crimes, such as police officers, correctional officers, stalking, dating violence. It would expand it over those particular areas. Importantly, and that's important to watch, because what it says is the House is okay with tribes having jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, however limited it is, in domestic violence and in certain other areas. And these tribes that assert the special jurisdiction, they have to, do some code development and such. And so there's been about 27 tribes that have taken advantage of that special jurisdiction. We are one of those tribes. And so, so it's been important for us to make sure that we are advocating for VAWA 21 and that we hope that we see it pass out of the Senate. I'm sure we will. And keep in mind, the original architect of VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, is President Joe Biden when he was a senator. And so he has made major reforms since 1994 when it was first enacted until today. And he's continuing to make major reforms in that law and has never once forgot Native Americans and the unique circumstances regarding criminal jurisdiction on our land. So those are just some of the things that we continue to work on. And like Chief said, we see a path forward for delegate seating this session. That's our goal. And so I like to work backwards. So I'm kind of looking pre-summer and then what all does it take for us to get there? Well, part of it for us, the planning was, let's get Deb confirmed. So we get that piece. The other piece is identifying the congressional champions and such. We don't have any members of Congress who are opposing us. Our senators have said that's a House thing. You know, only the House gets to vote. The Speaker of the House has a unique power to seat a delegate, but it's not been done via a treaty before. So there's some process issues to work out, and that's what we're doing now. With that, I'll leave you with this thought too, and then I'm happy to answer questions. And I'm sorry I probably went over because you give me an opportunity to speak, and I'll take it. We do have a website, Cherokee.org. And it's a microsite. If you go to the About the Nation, it's called Citizen Action. And in it, we need to update it because now that Deb has been confirmed, we need to take her letters of support off and then update our Violence Against Women Act letter. But it's a little underwhelming when you go. It's just kind of, here's the information. We are looking to improve that website. You know, we want to add pictures from our citizens. We want to beef it up a little bit. We want it to scream, look at me, scroll through me and find all this wonderful information. So we are looking for ways to improve it. And since you're the at-large citizens who are most likely to use this page, especially if you've got ideas about it, please let us know. And because we'd love to take your input and see your input reflected in an improved microsite on our website. That's all I have for you guys. And I'm happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Kim. This is April again, one of your board members. We have some questions in the chat while the rest of you maybe think of your questions. One interesting one is, let's see, if seated, would you have an office and staff provided by Congress? Like I think what that's really getting to are, of course, you get different privileges and it could mean a different influence. So maybe you could share with us, especially those of us that might not know that much about the federal organization, is what this means different from the advocacy that you already do being seated in the House of Representatives.
Sure. So, well, I mean, I've been a staffer for members of Congress before. On the House side, I've never worked on the Senate side. And I've been on the outside and having been a lobbyist for tribes too, and having worked obviously in the White House in a policy-making role. So I've seen policy development occur on different levels. And so it's different than being what I am today, which is I'm the government relations advocate. You know, nothing beats member level engagement. You know, when you are engaging on a member level as a member, you have that access. You have direct access to the speaker. Right now, you know, we meet with staff, which is fine because staff makes the day-to-day operations of the Hill go round and round. But you know, there is nothing that beats member level engagement. You want members to be there and be your advocate and have member level conversations. For me, the critical part of those conversations were in committee proceedings and during votes, either in committee or on the floor, where members are actually gathered and they caucus, member level caucuses. So nothing beats that one-on-one interaction. We've had great successes. When I say we, I mean Indian country, because members got directly involved. Your members of your delegation, whether it's Patty Murray or Senator Cantwell, and you can better believe they were champions of the VAWA Native American provisions that are in VAWA 21. But they engage on a member level basis, and they're able to educate their members far more effective than any staffer could ever be who are working on a staff to staff basis. And so, but in addition to that, the distinctions between me and a member of Congress would be, one, as a delegate, I would not get a vote on the House floor. That doesn't mean I can't go to the House floor when votes are being taken. You can speak on the floor. You can have a bill considered on the floor. You can rise in leadership. We can see the DC delegate to Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, is probably the most senior that any territorial delegate has ever been. And I'm interested in this because I'm curious to see how far she goes. And theoretically, she could be Speaker of the House one day and not have a vote on the House floor because she's a delegate. But you've seen, by the way, DC statehood legislation moving out of the House. It moved out last week and it got killed in the Senate. But there's been an effort and wide support to make DC its own statehood so that their delegation can actually vote on the floor. And so there are a lot of powers, but that's the thing that distinguishes a member of Congress from an actual delegate, which is that final vote. And that's one of the reasons why you also do not run into any kind of dual representation problems either. The other is, frankly, what we said earlier is the authorization for our delegate is established by treaty, whereas U.S. territory delegates are established by an act of Congress that required both chambers vote, right? Our treaty has already been approved by the Senate and has been signed by the president, so it's still the supreme law of the land. And if anybody wants to doubt that, we have a 2017 federal court opinion that reviewed our 1866 treaty. That treaty is important to this discussion because that was our last treaty with the United States that approved all prior treaties that were not inconsistent with that treaty. But it basically said, Cherokee Nation, your treaties are valid here and you must comply with the treaties. And that's what first gave Chief Hoskin, when he was then Secretary of State of the Cherokee Nation, the idea to say, if Cherokee Nation has to comply with its treaties, so should the United States. Just because these are old treaties doesn't mean that they're less valid. They are very much valid. So, so those are sort of the distinguishing factors. I do believe once we get seated, we will then be pursuing what's called MRA. There are member allocations for offices like your congressional delegations, even delegates, U.S. territory delegates get a special appropriations so that they have congressional offices and staff and stuff. So I do anticipate getting that eventually.
Okay, I don't see any hands, so I'll go back to the chat, but feel free, everybody, welcome to raise your hand or use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions. It's pretty rare. Oh, we have one. There you go. Lynette, please unmute yourself.
I just want to thank you for coming, and it's been fascinating and inspirational to hear you speak, and I appreciate it so much. I have a question. Has there been any timelines that have been set out for the process to seat you in the House of Representatives?
Just the timelines that we have for ourselves. I'm kind of a bull in a china shop personality. And so we had great momentum pre-COVID. In fact, a year ago this month was the last time Chief Hoskin and I traveled to DC. And as you know, we also halted all of our travels for our at-large meetings too. But we had great momentum going into it. And so our hope was to have gotten it done that session because we had all the national, international media attention. We had all eyes were focused on this, and then COVID hit. And then the presidential election hit, and then the insurrection, and and then the transition of the presidential election, then this rescue. It's always really big things, And the reason those big things matter is that the one person who matters the most in this discussion is Speaker Pelosi and her staff. And when these big things are occurring, her staff and the key people on them are pivoting to that. So we're taking this opportunity to do it. So we're working off of a timeline of this session. And so we'll see how much we can accomplish this session, but our hope is we can get it done this session. And that's a timeline we created for ourselves.
I have one other question too. I'm from Oregon, from the Mount Hood Cherokees. I wondered if you would speak to us as well. Would that be something you're interested in?
I'd love to. I'd love to. And you know what? And thank you for inviting me. So I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that the senators of Oregon have been pretty good to Indian country as well, right?
Yes.
And as have the tribes. Yeah, as have the tribes in there. You know, Senator Wyden and Merkley have been awesome advocates for Indian country, and you obviously have a very good House delegation. And Mr. DeFazio has owned infrastructure packages and transportation bills for the longest time, and has made sure tribes have been absolutely a part of those packages for years. And of course, you know, Mr. Blumenauer, and you know, so you all know your delegation,
Yes,
you know, much better than me. But I want to give a special shout out because you know, the Mount Hood Cherokees and the Cherokees from Washington State, you guys are blessed to have such, you know, a state with leaders that are, you know, really understand your issues and are on, in my opinion, the right side of our issues too. So it's a good thing.
yes, they're very helpful. I've been working with Mr. Wyden's office on behalf of Warm Springs with Jeannie.
Yeah,
It's also on this call. And we raised a bunch of money for them to get their water. They haven't had clean, you know, a water system there for years. It's broken.
You know, Chief Hoskin was invited, and we'll be doing this on Monday at noon Central Time. He is participating on a White House water and water infrastructure listening session. It's completely focused on Indian country, and of course he's taken on new initiatives as well to bring clean drinking water and updates to the water infrastructure and within our reservation as well. And so I will be doing that.
Yeah, and so how would I get in touch with you to see if we could set up a date?
I will give you my email.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to get everybody fired up.
Okay. Hey, Travis, if you wouldn't mind writing.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll put
Thanks.
I'll put
Okay.
my email
Thank
in the
you.
chat.
Okay.
And I
Jeannie?
think that's how somebody reached out to Travis, and that we were able to get me set up too.
Right.
And he'll work on my scheduling.
I wasn't sure if, Jeannie, I thought I saw your hand up, and I'm not sure Art might have saw your hand up as well. Just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask a question.
Okay, and again, Watto, thank you for being here. This is very exciting. I do have a couple of questions. And thank you again, the water situation. It's horrible what's going on multiple reservations. So that's exciting to see conversations happening. But is it important for us to go ahead and reach out to our local tribes and get them engaged in writing some of these letters? Or is that something that is already happening? Or should we go ahead and contact the tribal councils and let them know? And as we meet with other tribal members here locally, go ahead and encourage them to send letters to our representatives and all of that. And then another thing where I think this is exciting and great that we are doing this is at-large communities. But I do know I'm a member of both Mount Hood Cherokees and Puget Sound because I'm right here on the border between the states in Washington. And it's been pretty noted that we are at-large communities are nonprofits, and we are not allowed to engage in political discussions in the nature of that or risk losing that status. So what are the rules associating that? Is this something that we can continue to do as if, you know, within the organizations? So I have.
Right. I don't want to give you the wrong law because I don't know the circumstances of the organizing piece. I don't know if you're a 501c3, C4, if you're organized under Washington State or Oregon law, but I will say this. So throughout this advocacy piece and some of these examples that I gave you, a critical part of those discussions have been with the tribes themselves, the tribal leaders themselves, and with their representatives or their lobbyists. And so the tribes in your area are well informed and well aware of a lot of these national needs because they're participating in them too. You know, you can one-off talk to the individual tribes if you have those relationships, but you should be aware too that they are particularly active. You know, gosh, I could just riddle off several of them now, but what you can also do is they have the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, ATNI, which is pretty active too. That's the regional intertribal organization that includes the tribes of Oregon and Washington State, and where they come together and are of like mind. Chief Hoskin actually presented at ATNI, and Fawn Sharp, who's the Quinault president, is a dear friend of mine and is also the president of the National Congress of American Indians, offered a resolution supporting delegate to Congress. So we've got an ATNI resolution supporting, and I think Leonard Forsman may have been the one who was he made a second, and then the Puyallup tribe, David Bean, of course, so there are definitely solid relationships there, and I think working through the intertribal organization might be a good start. But if you've got the one-on-one relationships, I think definitely working there. One thing to keep in mind, though, and I'll just preface this by saying it, I've not come across it yet, but we are a tribe that's 385,000 citizens. And sometimes when it comes to formula distribution of funds and what those formula looks like, there's sometimes differences of opinion when it comes to how those funds get dispersed, because obviously population-based supports our needs and it may not support other needs. And so that's the only caveat I give to that. But I think every issue that we have listed on our microsite is one that all the tribes support, and I would, including the Northwest tribes, that they support. So I think that the most important engagement from my perspective is educating and continuing to engage with your congressional delegation. When we have to deal with so as we engage on delegate, I do think it would be helpful to also remind the tribes that are a part of ATNI that we're trying to advance this delegate position now, and that's where they can be of most help, because as we engage and get momentum again, we'll start going back out to the organizations that pass these resolutions and asking those member tribes to speak up on behalf of their tribal nation and of their organization that supported this resolution, and urge their delegation to support seating the delegate. But I can find out. So Travis, will you please note the question about Puget Sound's Washington State's a 501c3 organization. I've always thought, as a general rule, that 501c3s and C4s can educate. There's a distinction between educating and advocating, and so you can always educate. And so I do think educating somebody and telling them about the history of delegate is appropriate.
Right. I do think it's safe, and Joseph may be able to speak here, that's what we're doing here today. We're simply educating our membership. We're showing you how you can, if you would like to, giving you information on how you may advocate and why that is important. We would not be writing a letter as the organization, but we can encourage the education of our members, and then you all can do whatever you see fit, certainly, hopefully, after you've been educated, to make your own decisions on how you'd like to move forward.
I see Chief Hoskin joined us, April.
Yeah.
Chief, you want to say something?
He's back.
Just very, very briefly, I've been listening to the entire discussion, but one of the things that we did when we reorganized CCO and how we interact with the at-large organizations is to actually encourage, through the executive order, this kind of sort of external educating. And I do believe, although certainly make sure you vet it and are satisfied with the safety of what you're doing, but I firmly believe that 501c3s can educate on matters of public policy when it comes to something like this. And so I think what you're doing is wonderful, and I think you encourage your members to, to speak out on, particularly on an issue like delegate. Just wanted to tell you we're encouraging you.
Okay, it looks like Lynette has a question. Art, I thought you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question? No? Okay. Lynette?
I just have a question about the ATNI. We have becoming members of it, some of us from the Mount Hood Cherokees. And I wonder if you need, well, we were on the first steps of becoming that, but would you need permission from the Cherokee Nation to do something like that, to join the ATNI?
You know, I'm not familiar with ATNI's membership rules, but let me take a look at that. And, and if need be, we can, talk to the ATNI leadership, because we've got good relationships with them, and see how best they think we should handle that.
They are coming together in Oregon and Washington, and they've got a big tracts of land that is was given to them, and they are going to put like a native space there, like right along the river, and have all the tribes that belong to the ATNI. They even may have everybody's flag up there of all the different tribes that are in there, and we're going to make it a native space. There's going to be places to hold, like if Chief Hoskins comes out, we'd be able to have our organizational picnic or whatever at that place. It's been pretty huge, and I'm really excited to have our own space here in the Northwest, and just wondered what the Cherokee Nation, if that would be okay to do or not do, or how as a nation could we be a part of that?
First of all, I think it's wonderful that they're building a space for the natives in the area. Absolutely. What I'm not sure of is if their intent is just for ATNI tribes that have their sovereign headquarters in the area, or if that's the intention, or if it's just
I think it's
that could include communities, tribal communities that work with the tribal nation. So if it's the latter, then I think it'd be wonderful to sort of set up shop there. I'm happy to investigate that a little bit more with Fawn. She's pretty open to all of that. And
really, thank you, because I just want to be more involved in our native. We have so many Cherokee Nation members in Portland and in Oregon and in Washington, that they would have a place to go.
Yeah. In a lot of instances, we have Cherokee Citizens that outnumber the population of Indians in the whole state, because you have so many small tribes too, right?
Right.
There's power in numbers, and I think it only benefits them to, for us to join them in their advocacy in some other formal way. So we'll work on that.
Okay. Thank you.
We could certainly, that might be a topic for another monthly membership meeting we could set up. Eric, it looks like you have a question. You can unmute yourself.
Thanks. I was wondering, is there any communication that the tribe has with the two Cherokee citizens that are U.S. representatives? Does the tribe talk to them at all about any of the bills going through, or is there any consultation with them?
We do. We actually have very good relationships with Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen, who's a Cherokee citizen. He's actually our congressman, as his congressional district includes Cherokee Nation's reservation. But we actually also have good relationships with Tom Cole, who's a Chickasaw citizen from Oklahoma, and the Republican co-chair of the Native American Caucus, and Sharice Davids, who's Ho-Chunk out of Kansas. And then Kai Kaeli, who is the Native Hawaiian who recently joined as a Democrat in the House of Representatives as well. And the new member of Congress, Yvette Harrell, we don't know her as well because she's brand new. But we have had conversations with her, And so when it comes to Native issues, we do try to be engaged with them, but we don't always get there. I mean, Congressman Mullen and Congressman Cole voted in support of the Violence Against Women Act 21, but Congresswoman Harrell voted against it. And so, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we don't always get our way, but we don't always consider any member of Congress a lost cause. We will continue to try to educate. She's committed to us that she would have an open mind and try to stay, become educated and informed. And so to that end, Congressman Cole has been reaching out to her and trying to educate her a little bit more on our issues.
Great. And it looks like in the chat there, Lauren has offered some help that she would like to respond to the call for help with our online presence and education tools. This is directly in my wheelhouse. So her information is there in the chat, LinkedIn. And then Bob had
actually, sorry, this is
Lauren. I'm sorry. That's the key. I used the wrong pronouns. My apologies.
I don't mind. So like I work a lot in the online and education space, and this is something that I think is phenomenal. That, you know, like as Principal Chief pointed out, that like the Cherokee picking up the pen when it's time to do battle is, I think, a great legacy that we continue to leave. And so that's something that I'm super excited that we can kind of bring that into a digital world, and I'm happy to participate in that where I can.
Thank you so much. Well, Travis Noland is, if you see his name and number in the chat, he is my staff, and he also handles our broadband issues, and he is well informed in this space, much more than me. And I laugh because I have friends that tell me I'm like their grandparents when it comes to technology. And so, but I do want us, you know, to get to a place where we can improve it. And you know, this is truly your page, so I'd love for you guys to give us the input here. So thank you for offering.
Definitely.
Awesome. We just have a couple last questions. I know your time is super valuable, and we're taking part of your Saturday, so thank you so much for being here and extending your time. One from Bob was, what would your term look like, or is that at the pleasure of the chief? And then he also asks, in this next big spending bill, Build Back Better infrastructure bill, what projects do you think would most benefit our tribe?
Thank you for that. So the term runs concurrently with the principal chief. So it's a 4-year term. And so that's kind of in our resolution. And I'm glad you asked about infrastructure, because infrastructure, one, I just mentioned broadband. Obviously, COVID has exposed the great disparities that still exist in our communities, rural communities and communities of color, and broadband is one of them. Travis actually is our lead on our connectivity issues. And so he's, with his leadership and Chief Hoskins' leadership, we've had deployed mobile Wi-Fi hotspots. I mean, these are Band-Aid fixes to a big problem. And so we need the resources to build out, you know, and to create connectivity throughout our reservation so that our students can continue to learn at a distance. And so our elders can continue to stay safe through telehealth, but they can't do it if they don't have access to Wi-Fi. And so there too are transportation. We've got, you know, great needs for our roads and the need for partnering and to make the transit system safer to build out these roads. And so having greater partnering abilities that comes with rural resources is key. Also, we are striving to be the very first tribe to enter into a self-governance agreement with the Department of Transportation. It's new legal authority that Department of Transportation has, where we can get our funding directly from transportation and use it in the best way that we think is best for our community. And so that is there as well. Obviously, construction dollars, that's part of infrastructure. We've found that with COVID, you know, with food just flying off the shelves and prices skyrocketing, that there was a need to build meat processing plants as well as PPE manufacturing plants. And so being able to be incentivized to continue that development, which also creates jobs, by the way, is something that is critical to us. And I see Chief Hoskin joined us again, so he might actually have more to say here.
But just briefly, first of all, I see George Witz, the comeback kid, is on here. We're glad to see George. So, hey, George. Two things in the infrastructure it's been mentioned. That Travis Nolan, who's on here, his work has literally led to thousands of Cherokees, particularly kids, get access to Wi-Fi. They never had it before, didn't have it reliably, and it's really changing their lives. And so he's done a good job. I think he was just in Kenwood yesterday, if you've heard of the community of Kenwood, putting up helping put up a device that sort of gives Wi-Fi in the area of the community building there. And so those are the kind of strategies we're employing. The second thing, there's a whole lot to talk about in infrastructure, but the second thing is this is the 40th anniversary of Wilma Mankiller conceiving of the Bell water line, which is a Cherokee word for water. If you've heard of the movie and you know the story. So 40 years ago, Chief Mankiller, well, before she was chief, community organizer, like many of you are, Mankiller, trying to figure out how to bring water to a great many of our people who didn't have it. It was 40 years ago, and there's still work to be done. So I'll just give you guys a sneak preview that this week we're going to be making an announcement relating to that. And I see that Bob has got the Cherokee word for water right there. So he's made a plug for it. So thank you, sir. And be looking this week. We have some great announcements this week and then as the year goes on. So we got a lot more to do. Chief Mankiller would not want us to stop, and we're not stopping. So just want to make those few comments.
Thank you, Chief. And so speaking of the Bell Project, you know, if you have seen that documentary, you'll see some of my relatives in there. I actually got emotional shortly after my grandpa passed away because I saw his brother and it looked like a younger version of my grandpa. And I'd only had pictures. I'd never had film of him before. So to see this man make these expressions like my maybe it made me very emotional. But that was a project, for those of you that don't know, that Cherokee Nation had received a federal grant to develop, to bring water to this rural community because Chief Mankiller at the time, Wilma Mankiller, had asked what that community wanted. They wanted water. And so in order to make the most out of the federal dollars that were being used, she had been inspired by other projects going on across the country, particularly in the Latino community, where they had the sweat equity program. So the idea was the community members would come out themselves and do the labor. And that would, if they did the labor, then they could use the dollars to maximize how far the water lines could go. And so, and that took some convincing. And, she enlisted the help of Cherokee speakers to help speak to the community members, and they did it, this sweat equity. And I didn't find out till years later when she was honored in DC, and she invited me to the program. And another gentleman was honored. He was a Latino gentleman, and I can't remember his name, but I remember the moment because he said Wilma had visited his community and wanted to learn about sweat equity programs and what had worked in those communities. And she said she was having a full circle moment because the thing that sort of sparked her notoriety was the innovative way in which she addressed water infrastructure needs in Cherokee Nation with a program. And she was giving credit where credit was due, being inspired by other communities. We learn by best practices of others, right? We don't always purport to this day to have all the answers. We just keep trying and building on what we have for the better. I mentioned earlier too, that Chief Hoskin was going to be a panelist tomorrow, and I'm pretty sure that is open. So if I find the link, we can send it out. But he's going to be a panelist on the White House listening session on water and water infrastructure. The idea is each of the tribal leaders and advocates get basically 5 minutes to tell their story to all these agencies. The White House is bringing them all in. When back in my day, the way of addressing water was literally, status quo funding, and then when tragedy struck or disaster struck, then there was this cobbling together of resources from EPA, from Indian Health Service, from different agencies to address an issue. But you can't address things one-off like that. There's got to be a comprehensive way. And so Chief Hoskin has built an initiative within Cherokee Nation through through partnering to address water infrastructure needs at Cherokee Nation, the maintenance of those infrastructure too. And so it's a timely topic for them to talk about, and it's well timed, this very important issue of sanitation and water infrastructure too. So those are the infrastructure kinds of things.
Okay, and Joseph, our chairman, do you have anything to add before we thank everybody? And those of you, just really quick, that might pop off because of our great speakers are going to be done, please consider staying. We are going to walk you through how you can get to that website, the advocacy web, the Citizens Action website. I think an easier way, you were asking for considerations, is I feel like it should be really big on the first page of going to the Cherokee Nation, because it is, you got to kind of know how to get there. And then, so we'll be doing that. And if you are not already members of the Cherokees of the Puget Sound, the Cherokee community of Puget Sound, we'll talk about that too, and how you can become members. And because of the grant that we got, the COVID grant from the Cherokee Nation, we're able to, for those of you that have some hardships financially, we can waive that membership fee for this year. So we really encourage your participation. You can get great opportunities like having a free language study group every Friday with Mary, and so much more. So Joseph, I'll hand it off to you to thank our esteemed guests and ask any final questions. And then please do stay on, the rest of y'all. You can talk about how you can personalize your letters, the importance of the steps that you'll be taking, and how to navigate all of that. Thank you all so much for coming.
All righty.
Well,
All right.
thank you, Kim, for always being a great speaker. And honestly, anytime you want a place to speak, let me know. I'll have a format open for you. We love having you with us, and we'd love to have you more often, even if you want to call in anonymously. It was great to have you, and it was great to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited about how engaged you guys are, and I appreciate the invitation. You're the first of our at-large communities that have asked for us to go outside of the typical at-large discussion and just become directed to you. And I love it, because it also gives me a chance to brag on your congressional delegations as well, and your, frankly, the tribal organizations in your area too that have been so helpful in this whole discussion about protecting and advancing issues that pertain to us. So you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll just end, we don't say goodbye in Cherokee, right? We say until we see each other again. And when it's more than two people, we say so.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Haas, for taking the time today and spending it with us as well. It's always a pleasure to have you. We miss seeing you more often. One last note, we do have a book and movie club also on the weekends. So if anybody wants to join on that, we do that the first weekend of the month as well.
All right. With that said, for those of you that are interested in finding out more, I'm going to share my screen right now. There is a way in your layout. Joseph, I think your speaker might be giving some feedback.
Yep, I'll go back to sleep.
Okay. You can change your layout. Sign off. Oh, okay. Thank you for being here, Cindy. You can go up to your layout in the top right corner, and you can change that. So if you want to see a broader picture of whoever's sharing screen or the person talking, the share, I'm a little bit, Joseph helped me with this, so hopefully this will work. So here is the website, Citizen Action. If you will put this in the chat as well, so you can keep this, because as I said, if you just go to the Cherokee Nation website, I found it really difficult to find this if you don't know how to. I actually found it easier just to Google Citizen Action and Cherokee Nation, and it took me right to it. So hopefully they're going to work on that. When you go here, Kim talked about they're going to need to update this, because some of the things they were asking us to do have already happened, like the seating of Deb, Interior Secretary. But here you can see Citizen Action. And right here where my cursor is, find your senator and find your representative. And right now, if you're interested, the most important thing is the seating of Kim Teehee in the House. And as she mentioned, the Senate has said that's not really our thing, that's for the House. So really what you want to do is find your representative for the House. If you don't already know what that is, you can click on this. And when you click on it, you can you'll get put here, and then you can type in, now this is for, this will be even for you all over in Oregon. Put in your zip code, and then you specifically put in your address, and it will pop up which representative is yours. When you click on your representative, at least for the state of Washington, instead of giving you an email address, it will have you fill out your information, making sure that you are their constituent, and then you'll put your letter in a box, and then you'll send that off. If you want to do it online, it will also give you a snail mail address if you would like to send a letter through snail mail, through regular post. It has been requested that if you do send a letter, if you do it cyberly, that you maybe capture that letter and also send it to the Cherokee Nation, and I'll show you that email. Because they really want to know who all is and how many of those folks have been gotten communication, your different representatives, from us. If you do a snail mail or through the post office, then you would just copy a letter and also send it off to the Cherokee Nation so that they would have that. I'm going to go back here, and this is what Kim's talking about. The biggest thing that you can walk away with today is this delegate to Congress. So these are all the different downloads. And if you click on the delegate to Congress, it will take you to a letter. So you can download this letter, you can copy it, you can just fill out the things that you need to change and send it off. Or more importantly, you can take a little bit of time to personalize it. If you don't have the time, it's way more important that you at least get something off if you don't feel like you need to personalize it. But I do know, as I was a past elected official, you get a lot of these kind of rote letters, and you get used to seeing them, and you have a lot of stuff in your inbox. So when they are personalized or a little bit changed, it does impact the elected official differently, or their staffer who's helping them. So just, you can just thank them for something that they've done in the past in your introduction that you really appreciated. The good work that they're doing, you can certainly mention that. If you have more specifics of your area, your feeling of you being a Cherokee Nation citizen, and even though you're not on the reservation, 80% of us are not on the reservation, so you could mention something like that. And then going back to the downloads, so we're back here on this first website again. You can see that Indian Child Welfare Act. This one they're going to be removing because we did get Deb seated. And then there's several others down here. And so this is also the website Kim was asking that if you found different ways, and Lauren, you might be able to help with that, to really engage people when they get here and get them excited, then you can give those suggestions here. So this website, Cherokee-vote@cherokee.org, is where I would suggest copying, and I don't know if Travis is still on here. I guess you could also copy it to Travis's email, but this is where I copied mine, and I sent my letter there.